When a Texas judge ruled to overturn the 23-year-old FDA approval of the abortion pill Mifepristone, he not only further restricted abortion access across the country, but also plunged the pharmaceutical industry into uncertainty. The Biden administration plans to appeal before the Supreme Court, but opponents say if the ruling is upheld, it could challenge the very foundation of drug oversight and development in this country. This threat prompted more than 400 leaders in the drug and biotech industry to issue a statement condemning the ruling and warning, quote, if courts can overturn drug approvals without regard for science or evidence or for the complexity required to fully vet the safety and efficacy of new drugs, any medicine is at risk for the same outcome as Mifepristone. What does that mean for other medications that people rely on every day? And what about the companies researching and developing new drugs, many based in and around Boston? I'm joined now by two people whose names are on the industry condemnation statement. Peter Pitts, president and co-founder of the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest and a former associate commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And Donna LaVoie, president and CEO of LaVoie Health Science, a strategic communications firm in the health and science space based here in Boston. Peter Pitts, Donna LaVoie, thank you so much to both of you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it. The opportunity to talk about this.
Peter, I'll start with you. Just tell me what your immediate reaction was to hearing that a judge had essentially paused FDA approval of a drug.
Well, after they picked me up off the floor, I recognized that this really wasn't exclusively about anybody's position, be it pro-life or pro-choice. It's really about the future of healthcare and healthcare innovation in the United States. If this ruling stands, and I don't think that it will, innovation will cease. Consumers, patients, and healthcare professionals will lose faith in the FDA and will be in a very bad place.
Donna, I want to bring you in and note that a representative for one of the plaintiffs in the case, Christina Francis, Dr. Christina Francis, heads the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists. She told Vanity Fair in a piece today that they are not challenging the FDA's approval process overall, just the approval of this specific drug. Tell us about how this ruling undermines the FDA administration's authority overall, in your view.
Overall, for the biopharma industry, as you know, in Massachusetts is one of the key states in the United States, sort of really driving the sector, where we see hospitals, scientific institutions, and companies coming together, and as a total represent over 15% of the development going on in this country, which is a quite large number, not to mention the economic impact from a job standpoint. We have over 170,000 employees dedicated to this sector. But let's talk about the most important thing, which is patient access, and patient access to medicines, all very important medicines, both that are on the market today and ones that are currently in development. I think that there's where the biggest risk is.
I think that, one of the issues here, too, is not only access, but science. The Texas court challenged the FDA's scientific review process and disagreed with their decision. And that's completely beyond the jurisdiction of a court. In 2014, in Massachusetts, during the opioid epidemic, Governor Patrick tried to pull the drug Zohydra, which is a powerful opioid, off of the market. And a Boston district court judge said, opioid epidemic notwithstanding, it was outside of the governor's jurisdiction. You can't do that. This is exactly the same thing. When you challenge the direct authority of the FDA to make scientific decisions relative to safety and efficacy of drugs and biopharmaceuticals, it should be a pretty clear-cut legal decision. But the courts have been quirky, and you don't always want to put all your eggs in the smart basket. Crazy things can happen, and I think that we've got to be aware that even though there's only one drug under debate today, others could be under debate tomorrow. And if a judge can allow a state to pull a drug off the market, another judge might say that a state can put a drug on the market that the FDA doesn't approve. It leads to all sorts of extremely dangerous places.
I'm glad you raised that point. I think I can't look at the situation without thinking about the confusion and the uncertainty just of the COVID-19 pandemic. What concerns is this decision prompting for you when it comes to public confidence in the FDA?
One of the things that we should have learned from our recent pandemic experience is that when you allow emotion and religion and politics to supersede science, people get confused, and their immediate reaction is to lose faith in the government organizations that are tasked to do the right thing, whether that's the FDA or the CDC or state health departments. And when people don't know where to turn, they turn to social media, where, of course, everything is true and it's never wrong. Patients need to be reminded that the sources of the truth, the sources of the science, the sources of trust are places like the FDA and the CDC and their local doctors, not a chat group on social media.
Donna, we know from research that it's very expensive to move a drug from lab to market. A recent report from business consultants at Deloitte outlined that among the top 20 biopharma companies in the world, the average cost of developing a new drug now sits somewhere around $2.3 billion. How might this ruling play into the bottom line for medical research and development, particularly here in Boston? It's a hub, like you said.
Yeah. No, we all know that these companies have an insatiable appetite for capital. And, we're right now in a very uncertain economic climate from a capital market standpoint. We've had in 2022, as well as just now in the first quarter of 2023, a very slow number of companies to go public. And if you think about what you just mentioned is the insatiable appetite from a cost standpoint to develop these products and the failure rate. We've got to ensure for future access that we're continuing to fund the sector. And this kind of move also impacts the way capital markets think about the sector and the opportunity for investing, which puts it all goes back to economics and patient access.
It sure does. The failure rate in drug development is extremely high. And, what developers and the venture capitalists that fund them are looking for is some degree of predictability. And the key aspect of predictability right now is the regulatory process, the FDA. And when you take that out of the equation, money is simply not going to go into the industry, as Donna said, but it's also not going to go into riskier areas of the industry, orphan diseases, pediatric diseases. You're going to find drug makers playing it safe. And that's not really a good sign for breakthrough innovations that we're seeing today in areas like ALS and Alzheimer's and such. We have to keep the innovation spirit alive. And this ruling throws a big bucket of cold water right on top of it.
Two harder questions now that I have to ask both of you. I read that the FDA just this month withdrew approval of a drug which was supposed to safely reduce the risk of preterm birth among women with a history of that. It's a drug that was approved under the agency's accelerated approval pathway, and yet that decision has now been reversed. I don't think that either of you would say that the FDA's processes are foolproof, but is it time, in the interest of bolstering public confidence, to add a layer of oversight to the agency? Either
well, the drug that's being withdrawn was withdrawn because it didn't work. When a drug is approved by the FDA via the accelerated approval pathway, it's a conditional approval, which means that the FDA is going to allow the drug to be used. They're going to look at the data as to what happens in the real world, and then make its judgment as to whether the drug gets full approval or whether it's yanked off the market. That's the right thing to do. You want to give patients access to drugs, but you also have to understand what's happening out there in the real world. In this case, the FDA monitored the drug as it said it was going to do. The data showed the drug was not effective. The FDA withdrew the drug, which is exactly the pathway that's supposed to happen relative to an accelerated approval project.
Donna?
Yeah, I would just add to that is very simply put, if you think about the FDA's, what they're there to do, which is to assess benefit over risk. And as Peter said, whether that's at time of approval or in post-approval processes, that is their job. We can debate whether that should have happened for that particular product, but I think you really need to go back to what the FDA's, what they're there for and the importance of having that oversight from a risk-benefit standpoint.
Right. And this science is very complicated. The last time most Americans touched science, including elected members of Congress and judges, was in high school when we were dissecting frogs, and there was a right answer and a wrong answer. regulatory science has tremendous nuance and enormous gradations of black and white and gray. So when you talk about oversight, the FDA's review process is incredibly complicated. Hundreds of people touch every single application. They're highly trained and highly educated and very dedicated to their jobs. So when you say oversight, in my mind, I see lay members of Congress or judges trying to make decisions for which they are simply not qualified to do. So you have to be very careful about what that means.
Excellent. Peter Pitts, Donna LaVoie, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.